Got to get into the Sixers versus Pacers. Action begins tonight on 97.3 ESPN. As promised, joining us on the Boardwalk Kinda Hotline, covers the Sixers for 97.3 ESPN.com. You can follow him on Twitter at KevinMCC973. He is Kevin McCormick. Kevin, it's game day. How you feeling?
Josh, I'm feeling great, dude. I'm feeling amped for the first time in months. We have a Sixers game that actually means something. It's the sprint to the NBA title begins today. I'm excited.
So we got to start with the little news that just came out just about, I believe it was like 15, 20 minutes ago with the injury report. Glenn Robinson III is doubtful with I look like it's like a left hip pointer situation. So if he doesn't play, what do you think that means for the Sixers rotations tonight?
I think it gives a chance for a guy like Matisse Thybulle to really step up and show just how crucial he can be, because with no Glenn Robinson out, that's now one wing player off the bench that was in that mix to really eat up a lot of those minutes. So now all the minutes were already up for grabs between him, Thybulle, and Korkmaz is now even more wide open. So, I mean, we could see Matisse see more time on the floor. It gives a guy like Firkin to show that he can be sustainable on the floor, and also gives a chance to a guy like Alec Burks. You know, he played really well in that third final scrimmage game, and now with more minutes opening up, we could see him more on the floor, and he can show just what a piece he could be as well.
You know, I really like what I've seen from Thybulle so far, and I'm really hoping he earns a full-time role, because I know everyone talks about, well, he's not the greatest shooter in the world, but for me, Kevin, I just feel like I want to see him on the floor, because I'm concerned that when you're going against some of these teams in the Eastern Conference, who's going to guard the perimeter? And no offense to Ben Simmons, but he can only guard so many players at a time. And Tobias Harris, he's a forward. He's not really a wing guard type of player. So let's be realistic. Furkan Korkmaz is not a shutdown defender, and Thybulle is. So I really want to see him get that opportunity and let him take advantage of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he's done that in these scrimmage games. I mean, if you watch and you see his play, obviously he brings it all on defense like he did from day one. But on offense, he's looked a lot more confident. I mean, even in that third and final game, he shot really well from deep. And the thing with him is if he can continue to show that confidence to really just step into threes, whether they're falling or not, eventually they will fall. The stroke will come. He'll have those hot games. But the fact that he's just taking the chance to step into those shots, and he
looks like we lost Kevin there for a moment. We'll try to get him back on the line here. He was literally in the middle of making a good point, and he disappeared. Try to get him back on the line here. His phone just dropped out there for a sec. Kevin McCormick, our 97.3 ESPN.com Sixers writer, covers the Sixers for 97.3 ESPN.com. I'll try to get him back on the phone line here. Make sure he is good to go. Kevin, we got you back now?
All right, can you hear me?
Yeah, you literally disappeared in the middle of making your point. So let's try that again.
All right. Well, yeah. So what I was saying about Matisse, I mean, the defense is always going to be there. He's played great on that end as well. But one thing that's really just stepped out to me in these scrimmages is the confidence he shows on offense. And like you said, he's not going to be this prolific offensive guy, but if he can continue to grow and you see him in those situations where he can just really step into those catch-and-shoot threes and knock them down, it really gives him an opportunity to play big minutes on the floor. And like you said, they're going to need that strong defense on the perimeter. And having him and Ben Simmons out there together on the floor just puts the Sixers' defensive ceiling arguably at the highest it will ever be.
When you think about the Sixers and how they match up with the Pacers tonight, what do you think is going to be the key tonight? Because for the Sixers, this is a key game for them to get the opportunity to have that game up on the Pacers in terms of seeding and opportunities.
Two things that are really going to stick out for me is perimeter play, just because the Pacers are going to be without Domantas Sabonis, who is really their anchor down low, and now with him out, they've really been playing kind of a 5-out offense. So the Sixers are really going to need to bring it on the perimeter like they did in all of these scrimmage games to really chase these guys off the throw-point line, force them into the lane, force them into Joel Embiid so they can shut down them. And then the other thing that's really going to stick out is a type of bully ball. I mean, Brett talked about it very early in the season, but without Sabonis, this Pacers roster is very small outside of Miles Turner. So, I mean, with getting Joel Embiid back most likely, if they can dump him the ball in the post early, get Miles Turner in foul trouble, it'll open up things greatly. We could also see a lot of Ben Simmons playing around the elbows and really taking mismatches off the dribble and getting right to the rim.
They talk about him off the dribble. Well, what about Ben Simmons shooting? Do you think we're going to see Ben Simmons shoot tonight?
Maybe. I mean, the one key factor from the scrimmages of when we saw him shoot and when we didn't see him shoot is Joel Embiid. When Joel Embiid was in the lineup, Ben Simmons stepped out and he hung around the perimeter a little more to give Joel Embiid that space in the post. So maybe with Joel Embiid back, we do see more of the Ben Simmons that we saw against the Grizzlies than we saw against the Mavericks and the Thunder.
Kevin McCormick joining us here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure to follow him on Twitter for all your Sixers coverage at Kevin MCC973 on Twitter. Also his work at 97.3 ESPN.com. Now, you mentioned Joel Embiid, and I asked this question for the last couple of days because I'm still scratching my head over this calf strain situation. So is Embiid on a minute restriction? Is he on any kind of restriction? You know, what can we actually expect from Joel Embiid tonight?
I think it's going to be very up in the air. Brett really hasn't said much. Maybe we'll hear a little more pregame now that Joel Embiid's been taken off the injury report. But I would assume we don't see big minutes from him day one. I mean, hopefully Brett is still going to try to get him to that point where he wants to play 38 minutes in the playoffs. But obviously that is going to be a long stretch now that you have to kind of shake off the rust with him again. But I think we could see decent minutes from Joel Embiid today, but I wouldn't say we see anything crazy.
So maybe 28, 30 minutes might be the cap?
Yeah, maybe. Just because, you don't want to rush him back too soon. He's only played one half in all of these scrimmage games. So you really just want to get him out there, see how he's moving, knock that rust off again, and really kind of ease him into upping the minutes as these games go.
So you're anticipating that the Sixers are going to use these 8 games maybe as a ramp up for Embiid for the playoffs. Is that how I'm reading this?
Yeah, I feel like that would be the best way to do it just because, he didn't play in the scrimmage games and you really want to make sure he's ready. And I don't see why you would go out and try and throw him out there those big minutes game one.
Now, with all things considered, and obviously this can change from game to game, but we know what the starting lineup is going to look like. The Embiid, Simmons, Harris, Richardson, Milton lineup. But how many minutes do you think that unit is actually going to get together versus guys coming to and from the bench? Because if they're ramping up Embiid, is he the only guy they're ramping up? And also, does that mean we're going to see more of Al Horford tonight in other games?
I would say we might see a little more of Al Horford early on just because of, like I said, you really want to, take your time with Embiid and give him the chance to really get ready physically. But hopefully we see a good amount of that starting lineup together because prior to them arriving to Orlando, those 5 didn't see a minute on the floor together. And Brett Brown said from the beginning he wants to give that 5 as much time as it can to grow. So hopefully when Embiid is out there that the other 4 starters are on the floor with him so they can continue to work and tinker with the starting lineup because come playoffs, those 5 are going to be the big minutes and they need to be ready to go and they need to be clicking on all cylinders.
Do you think that Al Horford's ability to get into the games, whether it's these 8 games or the postseason, is that purely going to be as a replacement for Embiid, or do you think at all we could see lineups where Horford and Embiid on the court together?
I think we'll see stints of them together. I don't think it will be large sample sizes, but I really don't see them using Al Horford strictly just as a backup for Joel Embiid, especially because of how well he played in those last 2 scrimmage games, and he was knocking down shots from deep. If he can continue to shoot that at a nice clip, I think it'll give Brett Brown the opportunity to play them together a little more. But in terms of the large grand scheme of things, I don't see big sample sizes of them 2 together, but I do think we do see stints of them on the floor together.
With that being said, I got to wonder, and this is not really much about the games right now, but maybe the future of the Sixers. I mean, does Elton Brand really just need to, sit down this offseason, when October comes around and have an honest conversation with his staff about what the future is of Al Horford is in Philadelphia, because it feels like at this point, not to be mean to Al, he's still a good NBA player. He's probably going to be a starter for the majority of teams in the league, but it just seems like this was a failed experiment for the Sixers, and do they have to just admit they got to move on from him?
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a conversation that has to be said, because even if you do want to transition him to a bench piece moving forward, that is a very expensive price tag for your sixth man that you could use in other areas. So, I mean, hopefully when Orlando comes, I think the short offseason is going to kind of hinder what they do with him. So it may even favor we see him early on next season. Maybe we see him move at a trade deadline or something. But the conversation definitely has to be talked about, because from the beginning, that fit was always clunky. And, I mean, when you have these two young superstars in Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, you want to make sure you have the right pieces around them. I mean, I applaud Elton Brand for trying to reinvent the wheel and go big in a league that continues to go small, but it just didn't work, and you really need to try and, cut your losses. And if you can get a good return on Al Horford now while he's still younger, as opposed to as his deal continues to go on, I think you really have to consider taking it.
This might not be a fair question, but I'm just going to ask it anyway. Is Al Horford the biggest disappointment for the Sixers this year?
I don't know. It's tough. I mean,
I didn't say it was the right question. It's just the one that came to my mind because, I've heard a lot of people say the Sixers team is the most disappointing in the NBA. But when I look at the Sixers themselves, I know there's a couple candidates for this, but I just feel like you spent all this money on Horford. You had all these theories and plans of how this was going to work, and it feels like it just never really got off the ground.
Yeah, I wouldn't say Horford himself would be the biggest disappointment, just because we also don't know what he does behind the scenes. I mean, Brett has even said himself that he's really, come into his own with this group as a leader. So, I mean, what he brings off the floor and what he could be doing for Joel Embiid and these younger guys off the floor, could still be a benefit to this team. But I think his fit in the starting lineup, I think, would be the better statement of saying what was the biggest disappointment. Because when it first happened, the Sixers' expectations shot through the roof. They had this starting five of all size and length, and how Al Horford looked in Boston. But the Al Horford we saw in Boston did not make the trip to Philadelphia. So I wouldn't say Al Horford himself would be the biggest disappointment, but I would say his fit, you could say, was the biggest disappointment in terms of this season.
Now, looking at the Sixers overall, they're staying in the Eastern Conference. We obviously know that these games, if they're going to be ramping up Embiid, and it's going to be maybe a little bit of experimentation with the chemistry time for the starting lineup, obviously we're not going to maybe see the best of the Sixers from one game to the next. So what can we expect from the Sixers when they get into the playoffs? How does this Sixers team match up with the teams like Milwaukee, the Raptors, the Celtics, the Heat? Obviously, the Sixers are considered by some below those teams. So how do they match up with those teams if they were going to make a run with this new starting five?
Arguably, I think they can go toe-to-toe with any team in the Eastern Conference right now. I actually wrote about it a couple weeks ago for the website at 97.3 that, kind of breaking down how the new-look Sixers match up against the Bucks. And I think even if you look at it now, they still match up with Milwaukee really well, because even though Al Horford slid to the bench, you still have great size in the front court with Ben Simmons. So you still have two big, strong bodies in Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons to kind of wall off Giannis to slow him down to get to the rim. But you also have a lot of length on the perimeter. So when Giannis tries to kick out to his shooters, whether it be Middleton, Kyle Korver, the Sixers are going to have length, versatility, and speed on that perimeter. So in terms of all-around defense, if they continue to just buy in on the defensive end of the ball and try and shut down teams on that end, they arguably can beat any team in a 7-game series.
What team in the East concerns you the most? Because I think it's interesting that you mentioned they can match up with the Bucks. So what's a team that would concern you that you would say, we all know about the Bucks, but is there another team that you look at and you say, that's concerning?
I would say it has to be Toronto, just because in my eyes, the Eastern Conference is a 3-team race with Philadelphia, Milwaukee, Toronto. But Toronto scares me just in the sense of they are a very deep team to begin with. They have a great coach, and now that they have a deep roster with championship pedigree. So, I mean, they pretty much kept their whole core together outside of Kawhi Leonard leaving. But having that full, deep roster that knows the bright lights have been under that pressure, has gone and done what it takes to win an NBA championship, that scares me a little bit. Not to mention they have arguably the best coach in the NBA right now in Nick Nurse.
Yeah, I would give Nick Nurse the coach of the year right now. I mean, but the fact that you have a Raptors team that had the same number of wins as last year and the same number of games, I think that's a huge credit to Nick Nurse. I mean, obviously, you got to credit the players too. I mean, but I'm telling you, Kevin, I think the Raptors might be the dark horse in the East. Everyone talks about the Bucks and the Celtics all the time, but I'm with you. The Raptors is the one team that scares me because they got the one team the other teams don't. They got experience.
Exactly. And, even though they lost that star player in Kawhi Leonard, like you said, they were all still there. They also played on that grand stage. Pascal Siakam continues to rise. He continues to be a diamond in the rough in his draft class. And, Nick Nurse just knows how to get the most out of those guys. And they have a lot of interesting, two-way players. They play hard. They play smart. So, I agree. I think they could be a dark horse to make a deep run again.
Kevin McCormick joining us here on the Boardwalk on the hotline on 97.3 ESPN. For your Sixers coverage, follow him on Twitter at KevinMCC973. All right, let's do a couple quick questions about the different awards and how they might relate to the Sixers or not relate to the Sixers. First of all, how many Sixers do you think should make All-NBA teams? This has been a hotly debated topic among people around the league. So how many Sixers? There's 3 All-NBA teams. How many Sixers should end up on those teams?
I would say 2. I think Tobias Harris could be very close. I think he had a very good year. But Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid is the best center in the NBA, so if he's not on any of those center spots in the All-NBA teams, I think he's robbed. And Ben Simmons had a very good year in himself. And, you can really throw him at the guard. Well, I can't really throw him at the forward spot now because it counts prior to suspension. But in terms of point guard play, there wasn't many point guards at the level that Ben Simmons played at. So I think those 2, you can vary them on whatever team you want to put them on, but they should make the All-NBA teams.
Also should be noted the All-NBA teams this year, they have multiple positions for guys. So Simmons could make it as a guard or forward. Same thing with Jimmy Butler, Anthony Davis is considered a forward and a center. So there's a lot of flexibility for the All-NBA team voting this year. All right, so Thybulle, should he be able to make the All-Rookie team first or second?
I think he has a case to make the second team. Obviously his offensive stats aren't anything glorious, but I think the way he played on the defensive end of the ball might give him a case to sneak into one of those All-Rookie teams. Who
should be the All-Defensive Player of the Year, if we're being completely objective?
That's tough. My gut would say Giannis, just because he's phenomenal on both ends of the ball. But, there's a case for Anthony Davis as well, but I think people are really counting out Ben Simmons in this debate.
Yeah, I think Ben Simmons makes an all-defensive team this year. I just don't think he makes the actual defensive player of the year because, like you said, there's a lot of talk about, and talk drives a lot of these awards. I kind of lean where you do with Giannis. I think he might get it. Now, speaking of that, who should win MVP, LeBron or Giannis?
Oof, that's another tough one. I've tinkered back and forth with the thought of, I think LeBron has a case, but I think you have to give the nod to Giannis just for the sheer fact of he was the best player on one of the top teams in the league. And prior to the suspension, the Bucks were on a record pace to have one of the top 4 greatest regular seasons ever. So, although he won it last year, I think he has a very strong case to come back and take the trophy again this year.
Yeah, and that's where we're going to disagree. I think it's LeBron. And my thing is that and I come from the school of the V and MVP means something. It's the valuable. You take Giannis off the Bucks, they're still a playoff team. You take LeBron off the Lakers, they're probably back in the lottery. And let's be realistic. Giannis, he didn't even play that many minutes this year in some games, and they were blowing people out. Whereas LeBron, the moment he comes off the court, his team has a negative plus minus. They're negative in offensive efficiency. They scored less than 40 points a game without LeBron on the court. So to me, LeBron's the guy. And I just feel like, you have a trouble differentiating between who's most valuable and who the most outstanding player is.
Yeah, that definitely can be played on. And another thing that's cost LeBron multiple MVPs at this point is just the fact of the expectation of the greatness that he brings. I mean, you could create a case that LeBron should have 2 or 3 more MVP trophies in his list of accolades at this point. But honestly, I wouldn't be mad if it went either way. Like you said, I think both have a really strong case to win the award. I think, going with my gut, I think it's kind of hard not to hand the trophy, to be honest.
Who comes out of the West?
That's tough. It's one of the LA teams. After seeing how they played each other a couple nights ago, it's tough. I think it could go either way, but my gut, I think I might have to go Lakers, just because of the sheer fact of the Clippers don't really have anybody to defend it big. And, I mean, if Anthony Davis can control the game the same way he did when they faced off a couple nights ago, I think it's going to be very hard for the Clippers to stop the Lakers. And the Lakers have really interesting weapons off the bench. I wouldn't say their bench is great, but they're very interesting. Because, if a Dion Waiters or a J.R. Smith can get hot and really sway the game for that second unit, they arguably could steal a game or two. So I may have to go Lakers.
Yeah, I'm with you, but selfishly, if I'm not being objective, I would love to see the Clippers versus the Raptors just for the storyline for the NBA Finals. I think that would be just incredible theater. But I'm with you. I'm getting the feeling more and more that LeBron's going to will this Lakers team into the finals, and it'll be a lot of fun to see. He's Kevin McCormick. Follow him on Twitter at KevinMCC973. Check out all of his Sixers coverage at 973ESPN.com. Sixers versus Pacers tonight. You can hear the action right here on 97.3 ESPN at 7 p.m. And as all guests, Kevin appeared on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Kevin, appreciate the time.
No problem, Josh. Take care.